It started with a message, one of 1,000 spam ads that littered the city's digital landscape. Normally I ignored them, just another corporate scam designed to suck in the desperate or the vain. But this one was different. Enhance your vision today. Be the first to experience the future of sight. Clinical trial, generous compensation. It caught me at the right moment, I guess. My job as a technician paid the bills, but barely. Long shifts monitoring information streams and malfunctioning drones left my eyes aching, my patience worn thin. So I clicked the link. They had me sign the usual waiver, a paragraph long. I skimmed it, of course. It was standard stuff. Some risks, but nothing worse than what I'd seen before. Hell, this was the future. The risks were the price of progress. The clinic wasn't exactly above board. Just another hole in the wall tucked between rows of high-rise slums, lit by the same neon that bled into every crack of the city. But the tech looked good, top-tier equipment. The doctor barely said a word, though. He wore a white coat, spotless, but there was something about him. Cold. Mechanical. He glanced at me once, like I was an insect under glass. "Night vision enhancement, right?" he asked. His voice was flat, as if this was routine for him. Just another day hacking away at the human body for some faceless megacorp. "That's the deal," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Supposed to be the next big thing, right?" He gave a half nod, then motioned for me to lie down on the table. I could hear the noise of equipment all around me. No pleasantries, no reassurance, just business. The surgical lights above turned on, casting everything in a sharp, white glare. "You might feel a bit of discomfort. The implant will interface directly with your optic nerves." I didn't feel a damn thing, just a numbness spreading across my face as the anesthesia kicked in. The last thing I saw before blacking out was the doctor's face, framed by those lights. Blank. Disconnected. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the brightness. Even through the haze of post-op drugs, the world seemed sharper. The clinic was poorly lit, as most places were at night, but I could see every detail. The cracks in the ceiling, the smudges on the walls, the way the fabric on my sleeve moved with every breath. It was almost too much, too real. "Procedure went smoothly," the doctor said from somewhere behind me, his voice still cold and distant. "Your vision will improve over the next few days. Side effects are possible but manageable." Side effects. I remember nodding at that, feeling like everything was under control. I'd heard worse stories about people getting brain implants that fried their synapses or skin grafts that rotted within weeks. I could handle a few headaches or some temporary discomfort. It seemed like a small price to pay for what I was about to experience. I stepped out of the clinic into the night, expecting to be overwhelmed by the neon glow of the city. But instead, everything just clicked into place. The lights were vivid, but not blinding. I could see everything clearly, the streets below, slick with rain, the people hurrying through the alleys, their faces lit up by holographic ads. It was like someone had turned the contrast up on the world. The night didn't feel like night anymore. I took the long way home, testing out the implant. I could see every movement, every twitch of a rat's tail or the flutter of a crumpled plastic bag caught in the wind. For the first time in years, I felt in control, like I had an edge over the city that constantly tried to chew me up and spit me out. But there were small things too, little details I hadn't expected. Colors seemed more vibrant, textures sharper. It was as if the city had peeled back a layer, revealing something just beneath the surface. My implant was more than I had bargained for, and I liked it. Back at my apartment, I sat in the dark for hours, just watching the world outside my window. Normally, by this time, I'd have to squint to make out the figures moving below. But now, I could see everything. Even in the dimmest corners, nothing escaped me. I could watch people go about their business as if it were broad daylight. It felt powerful, invincible even. But there was a nagging thought at the back of my mind. a whisper of something I tried to ignore. The procedure had been too easy, too fast. And that doctor, there was something off about the whole setup. I should have asked more questions, but I hadn't cared then. All I wanted was the upgrade. I should have known better. The first few days after the surgery were a revelation. The world had never looked so clear. My shifts at work flew by. Navigating information streams was a breeze. My enhanced sight detecting issues before they became problems. The headaches I had been warned about were there, but nothing unbearable. Just a dull pressure at the base of my skull, like the implant was settling in. I chalked it up to my body adjusting. But then came the shadows. At first, it was something I almost didn't notice. A shape at the edge of my vision, gone before I could turn my head. Maybe a trick of the light or the residual effects of the surgery, I told myself. The implant was still new after all. My brain was getting used to processing more information, sharper details. It made sense, didn't it? The first time it happened, I was walking home from work, the streets bathed in the usual neon glow. I was looking down, avoiding eye contact with the crowd around me. And then, out of nowhere, there it was, a figure standing still right at the corner of my eye. I stopped, instinctively turning my head to look, but there was nothing. Just an empty street corner, a cracked pavement glistening from the rain earlier that evening. I stood there, waiting for my brain to catch up, for my senses to realign. It was nothing, I told myself. I was tired. The implant was still syncing up. It would pass. But it didn't. The flashes continued. They never lasted long, just enough to catch my attention, to make me turn my head in search of something that wasn't there. A shadow slipping into a doorway, a figure standing too still in a crowd, always just beyond where my direct vision could reach, and always gone the second I tried to look directly at it. I told myself it was stress. That's what they always said about things like this, right? Stress or fatigue. But deep down, it felt like something else, something I couldn't explain. I remember standing in my kitchen one night, staring at the blank wall in front of me, hoping the shadows wouldn't show up again. I knew what I'd seen, but every rational part of me screamed that it was impossible. The implant couldn't be malfunctioning. I'd read the documentation, enhanced sight, night vision, maybe some headaches. Nowhere had it mentioned hallucinations or strange figures moving in my peripherals. Still, I tried to act normal, like everything was fine. The shadows didn't affect my day-to-day, yet. I went to work, had my usual conversations with the guys in the break room, avoided questions about the procedure. No one knew about the flashes, and I sure as hell wasn't going to tell them. But each day, the shadows grew bolder. I'd catch them more often in reflective surfaces, windows, mirrors, even the glass of my tablet screen. Sometimes it would just be a shape, standing still, watching me. Other times, the flash was more active, darting just out of sight before I could react. It was like these things were playing with me, teasing me, like they knew I could see them, but only when I wasn't trying. I started testing myself, staring at mirrors for longer than necessary, hoping to catch one of these figures standing still long enough for me to focus. But they were always faster, smarter than that. A blur, a wisp, and then gone. It was driving me mad. The moment I realized it wasn't just my imagination came one night after work. I was heading home, same as always, cutting through an alley to avoid the crowded streets. The alley was narrow, flanked by the usual towering buildings of glass and steel, the kind that reflected everything around them like giant mirrors. As I passed by one of the glass walls, I saw a figure, blacker than the shadows around it, just standing there staring at me. Except this time, it didn't disappear when I turned. I froze. My eyes locked on the glass, watching the thing just stand there, unmoving. Its shape was humanoid, but not quite right. Its limbs seemed too long, too angular. I blinked, half expecting it to vanish like every other time, but it didn't. It stayed, locked in place, waiting. I slowly turned my head away from the glass and looked directly down the alley. Empty. The space in front of me was completely clear, but in the reflection, that thing was still there, standing just a few feet behind me. A cold sweat broke out across my skin. My hands clenched into fists as I stared into the glass, refusing to blink, refusing to look away. And then, with the slightest shift of my head, it moved. Not fast, not in a blur like before. It moved deliberately, one step forward, then another, slowly closing the gap between us in the reflection. I didn't wait for it to reach me. I turned and ran. I ran faster than I thought possible, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I was at my apartment. The door slammed shut behind me. I sat on my bed in the dark, watching the window for any sign of movement. I felt like a prisoner, trapped by my own vision, unable to trust my eyes anymore. My implant was supposed to enhance my sight, give me an advantage. But now it felt like a curse, forcing me to see things no one else could. By the time dawn broke, I had made up my mind. I was going to call the clinic, demand answers. But as I reached for my phone, I hesitated. Who was I going to tell? The doctor, that cold, unfeeling surgeon who had barely spoken a word to me. And what would I even say? That I was seeing things, that the implant had done something to me. Even I knew how insane it sounded. No one would believe me. Hell, I barely believed myself. I didn't go to work the next day. There was no way I could sit in the office with all those people pretending everything was normal, while my vision was playing tricks on me. So I called in sick and spent the day locked in my apartment, trying to make sense of what was happening. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Maybe the implant was still calibrating, or maybe I was pushing it too hard. I spent hours reading through the documentation they'd sent me, but none of it mentioned anything like this. No hallucinations, no shadowy figures haunting the edges of your vision. There was nothing helpful, just generic legalese about the risks of experimental surgery and vague reassurances that the implant was perfectly safe. But it wasn't just the shadows anymore. The first time it happened, I was in the bathroom, brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection in the mirror. For a split second, my face... It wasn't mine. It was like the skin peeled away and I saw something underneath. Bone, muscle, raw tissue. It was so quick I almost thought I imagined it, but the image burned into my brain. I stopped, staring hard into the mirror, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. Not right away. But later, when I walked past the wall separating my living room from the hallway, it happened again. Only this time, it was the wall. For the briefest moment, I could see through it. Pipes, electrical wiring, even the empty space between the bricks. I froze, blinked, and it was gone. Just a solid wall again. What the hell was going on? Was this some kind of feature of the implant? Something they hadn't told me about? I paced back and forth in my apartment, trying to think it through logically, trying to make sense of it. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't. That night, it got worse. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, the soft sounds of the city outside lulling me into sleep. Without warning, the ceiling peeled away like it was never there. My eyes widened as I found myself looking straight through the roof of my apartment, through the floors above and into the dark sky beyond. I could see the stars, distant, scattered across the sky like dust. And I could see everything in between, the floors of the building, the people moving in the apartments above me, their bones and muscles glowing in the low light. I sat bolt upright in bed, sweat pouring down my face. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, and the ceiling snapped back into place, solid and real once more. I felt like I was losing my mind. What was happening to me? The next morning, I made up my mind. I needed answers. I couldn't keep sitting here, watching my world unravel around me. I headed back to the clinic, convinced that something had gone horribly wrong with the implant, that they'd screwed up the surgery or given me faulty tech. When I got there, though, The clinic looked different. The same, yet not. There was something off about it. The building seemed older, the walls more cracked than I remembered. It was as if the facade had started to slip, like I was seeing the building for what it really was, decaying, crumbling beneath the surface. I marched up to the front desk, tried to keep my voice steady as I spoke to the receptionist. "I need to talk to the doctor. Something's wrong with the implant." She barely looked up from her screen. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, look, this is serious. I think the implant's malfunctioning. I need to talk to someone now." She finally glanced up, her expression blank, indifferent. "I'm sorry, but without an appointment..." I slammed my hand on the counter, louder than I meant to. "I don't care about your damn appointments. Just get the doctor." The receptionist blinked slowly, her face eerily calm. "The doctor is unavailable. Please make an appointment." I wanted to scream, to grab her and shake her, to make her understand how messed up this all was. But something stopped me. I stared at her. Something about her face. There it was again. That split-second flash, the skin pulling away, revealing muscle and bone beneath. I blinked, and it was gone, but the image burned into my brain. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the clinic. I could feel eyes on me the whole way, the receptionist's dead gaze boring into the back of my skull. Out on the street, everything felt wrong. I could see through people as they passed me by, organs, bones, veins pulsing with blood, muscles contracting with every step. Some of them looked at me, but their faces were blurred, like I was seeing them through a fogged-up window. I staggered back, nearly tripping over my own feet. I was seeing too much. I stumbled back home, finding it hard to concentrate on my surroundings. By the time I reached my apartment, I was shaking, my breath coming in sharp bursts. I locked the door behind me and collapsed on the couch, staring at the walls, praying they wouldn't peel away again. But they did. Only this time, it was everything. The room, the city outside, the people. It all seemed to melt, layer by layer, until all I could see was the raw core beneath. The world was hollow, decaying from the inside out, and I was seeing it all. Every crack, every weakness, every hidden truth. I wasn't supposed to see this. No one was. The shadows were back too. I could see them clearly now. Tall figures moving in and out of the walls, their faces shifting, contorting. They moved closer, surrounding me, watching, waiting. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it all out, but it was useless. I could feel them, even without looking. My own body felt foreign, like I could see through my own skin now, the bones beneath glowing in the dark. I stayed like that for hours, my hands gripping the edges of the couch. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to trust. I was alone, trapped inside my own head, and the world outside was crumbling into something I couldn't understand. I didn't leave the apartment for days after that. I didn't eat, didn't sleep. I just sat there, staring at the walls, waiting for them to melt away again, waiting for the shadows to come back. And they always did. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, that it was just the implant malfunctioning, that my brain was still adjusting. But it was getting harder to believe that. The longer I sat there, the more I realized these things were real. The shadows weren't glitches in my vision. They were something I wasn't supposed to see. But now that I could, they were everywhere. The worst part was the stillness. When they appeared, the air in the room would change. Everything would go quiet. No sounds from the street outside. No noise of the electronics. Just silence. I could feel pressure building in the back of my skull whenever they were near, like they were pressing against my mind. That night, around 3 a.m, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and afraid to close my eyes, I saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was tall, with long limbs and a thin form. Its head was tilted, as if it were studying me and watching to see how I would react. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I couldn't move. It was like my body had shut down, paralyzed by fear. The figure didn't move at first. It just stood there, motionless, as if waiting for me to acknowledge it. The longer I stared, the more details I could make out. Its skin was black, not the absence of light, but a deep, shimmering void that absorbed everything around it. Its eyes were blank, open spaces where pupils should be. I blinked, and suddenly, it moved. Slowly, it took a step forward, then another. It didn't walk so much as glide, its movements smooth. My chest tightened. I was trapped in place, watching in horror as it came closer. When it reached the side of the bed, it stopped, towering over me. Neither of us moved. I stared up at it in shock. Then it bent down, its featureless face inches from mine. I could feel the cold radiating off of it, like standing next to a deep freezer. My skin prickled, my muscles seizing. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears louder than anything else. And still, I couldn't move. Then, without warning, it spoke. The sound it made was like a static hiss, a distorted whisper inside my head, bypassing my ears completely. I didn't understand the words, if they even were words, but I could feel the intent behind them. Something dark, something sinister. It was toying with me, testing me, seeing how far it could push before I broke. It straightened up, its head tilting again, like it was listening to something I couldn't hear. Slowly, it began to retreat, backing away toward the far wall. I sensed its presence on me, even as it disappeared, melting back into the walls. The silence lingered long after it was gone. I lay there, shaking, my body drenched in sweat. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I couldn't think straight. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that it wasn't real. But the more I tried to push the thoughts away, the more they crept back in. The shadows, the flashes, they weren't going anywhere. I started seeing them more often, and not just in my apartment. They were in the streets, in the reflections of windows, standing behind people as they walked by. Sometimes I'd spot them at the fringes of crowds, their tall shapes merging into the background, unnoticed by anyone but me. It was like the whole city was infested with them, these silent, predatory figures that no one else could see. The more I saw, the more I realized they were observing. And now that I could see them, they were getting bolder. They knew I was watching them. One night, after another sleepless stretch, I went outside. I thought maybe getting some air would help, that stepping away from the apartment might break whatever hold these things had on me. I wandered the streets for hours, hoping for some kind of distraction, something to take my mind off the creeping dread that had wrapped itself around me. But the shadows followed. Every alley I turned down, every corner I tried to lose them on, they were there. And then I made the mistake of looking up. For days, I'd been avoiding the sky. Ever since that night when my ceiling peeled away, showing me everything above, I hadn't dared look up. But now, standing in the middle of a deserted street, I tilted my head back, and I saw them. They were everywhere, hanging in the air, crawling across the sides of buildings, slipping between the cracks in the skyline, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all watching, all waiting. They were above me, below me, all around. And for the first time, I understood. They were real, and they had always been here. I just hadn't been able to see them before. The truth hit me. The implant hadn't just enhanced my sight. It had torn something open, ripped down a barrier that was never meant to be broken. These things, these creatures, were part of another world, another layer of reality hidden from us. And now, because of the implant, I could see them. And worse, they could see me. I don't remember exactly when I stopped leaving the apartment. The city outside was no longer safe. They were everywhere now, waiting for me. Even stepping out into the hallway filled me with a paralyzing dread, like they'd be there, just outside my door, waiting to pounce. I'd see them full on now, moving through my apartment with that unnerving, liquid grace. They never stayed long, but they made sure I saw them. An arm slipping through the wall, a flash of something dark crossing from one corner of the room to another. I was never alone. The air had changed too. The cold was constant now. No matter how high I turned up the thermostat, the chill in the room lingered, seeping into my bones, leaving my skin clammy. I knew they were responsible, that somehow they were leeching the warmth from the space, drawing it into their dimension, wherever the hell that was. And the whispers were getting louder. What had once been a faint noise in the background was now a steady stream of hissing, indecipherable noise. I'd hear them in the walls, in the vents, in my head. Always there, always speaking. Sometimes I'd catch snippets of words just out of reach, like they were trying to communicate something. But it was never clear. Never enough to understand. It was worse at night when the lights were off, and I'd lie there in the dark, the sound drilling into my skull. It was during one of those nights lying wide awake that they attacked for the first time. I had been drifting in and out of sleep, unable to fully rest, my mind still on high alert. The room was pitch black, the only light coming from the faint neon glow outside my window. It felt like I was being observed. I opened my eyes, and there, standing in the far corner of the room, was one of them. It stood motionless, its long limbs almost scraping the ceiling. Its body was a dark void, swallowing up the dim light around it, but there was something new now, something that made it even worse. Its eyes. For the first time I could see them. They were empty sockets, blacker than anything I'd ever seen. But there was something alive in them, something crawling just beneath the surface, like a million tiny insects squirming in the dark. I froze, my body locked up completely, terror gripping me in a vice. It didn't move at first, just stood there staring at me with those empty sockets. But then, slowly, it took a step forward. That's when the air shifted. The whispers intensified, like they were excited, like they were feeding off my fear. My skin prickled as the creature took another step, then another, its long arms brushing the walls as it moved. It wasn't in any hurry. It knew I couldn't run. By the time it reached the foot of my bed, I could barely breathe. My chest felt tight, my limbs numb. The creature leaned forward, its hollow eyes locking onto mine, and I could feel it inside my mind. It was trying to push its way in, trying to break through the last barrier I had left. I wanted to scream, to move, to fight, but I was frozen, trapped by its gaze. It reached out, one long, bony finger extending toward me. As it touched my forehead, a sharp, burning pain shot through my skull like a hot needle being driven into my brain. I gasped, convulsing, the world spinning around me. The whispers swelled, louder than ever, as the pain spread, radiating through my entire body. I thought I was going to die right there, in my bed, consumed by this thing. But then, just as suddenly as it started, the creature pulled back. The pain ebbed, leaving me panting, drenched in sweat. I blinked, disoriented, and when my vision cleared, the creature was gone. That was when I realized. They had crossed over. The implant hadn't just allowed me to see them, it had made me their beacon. They were using it to track me, to follow me. They were using me to breach into this world. I couldn't stay in the apartment anymore. They were closing in, getting bolder by the day. I could feel it, the way their presence lingered longer now, the way they seemed to know every move I made before I made it. They weren't going to stop until they had me. I needed to get the implant out. I didn't care if it killed me at this point. Anything was better than being their prey. I went to every clinic, every back alley doctor I could find, begging them to remove the implant. They all said the same thing: impossible. The implant had fused with my optic nerves, burrowed into the wiring of my brain. Removing it would mean irreversible damage, probably death. Some of the doctors looked at me like I was insane. One of them even laughed when I told him what was happening, muttering something about side effects before shooing me out of his office. The last doctor I saw, I'll never forget the look on his face. I had begged him to help me, told him that the implant was doing something to me, that I needed it out before the creatures found me. But as I spoke, my vision shifted again, and I saw the thing inside him. It wasn't human. Beneath the surface, his organs writhed, a dark mass where a heart should have been, his blood vessels pulsating with something thick and oily. I bolted from his office, not daring to look back. I couldn't trust anyone anymore. I couldn't even trust my own eyes. Whatever these things were, they were everywhere. Back in my apartment, I barricaded myself inside. I taped over the mirrors, the windows, anything that might reflect them back at me. I sat there in the dark, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting for the next attack. My body was falling apart, my hands wouldn't stop shaking, my head hurt constantly, and my eyes felt like they were on fire. I hadn't eaten in days, hadn't slept in longer, and they were still watching. I could see them in the walls, in the corners of the room. They were closer, their forms more defined. They had shape now, substance, like they were finally breaking through. That night, I heard the door creak open. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I gripped the knife tighter. I knew what was coming. I could feel them approaching. The room seemed to darken, the walls warping, and then, there it was, standing in the doorway. It didn't move this time. It just stood there, watching me. The pressure in my head built, the whispers filling every corner of my mind, pushing me to the edge. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to end it one way or another. I grabbed the knife and raised it to my eye. The cold steel of the knife quivered in my grip, its sharp edge hovering inches from my eye. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window, my face worn, drained, hollowed out by exhaustion and fear. I didn't recognize the person I'd become, the man who had wanted an edge, a gift, a chance to rise above it all. Now I was nothing more than a shell, broken and hunted. The figure in the doorway remained motionless. It stood there, its towering form hidden by the shadows, watching me with those vacant black sockets. My grip on the knife tightened, and I forced myself to focus. I could end it right here, right now. I didn't care about the consequences. Anything was better than this. I raised the blade higher, ready to plunge it into my eye and tear the implant free. I knew it would hurt. Maybe it would even kill me. But the thought of that was almost comforting. At least then it would be over. But something stopped me. Just as I was about to drive the blade in, a sudden realization hit me, as clear and sharp as the knife in my hand. It wasn't about me anymore. The creatures, they were preparing for something bigger, something worse. The implant was a doorway. I dropped the knife. The clang of the blade hitting the floor echoed in the silence, but I barely heard it. My mind was piecing it all together. The implant had broken some kind of barrier, allowing me to see these things, these entities that had always been lurking beyond human perception. But it had done more than that. It had weakened the boundary between dimensions. If I didn't stop this now, it wouldn't just be me. These things, they'd spread. They'd consume everything. I had to do something. But what? If I took out the implant, would that stop them? Or would it kill me and leave the door wide open for them to finish what they'd started? There was no time to think. The room was warping around me, the walls bending, the shadows deepening. More of them were coming. I could see their forms slipping through the cracks, slithering into the room like smoke. I reached for the knife again, my mind made up. I was going to end this. I didn't care if it killed me. I couldn't let them cross over, couldn't let them take everything. I raised the knife once more, this time with more resolve, and pressed it to my eye. The cold metal pressed against my skin, and I winced, every nerve ignited in pain. The whispers surged, as if they knew exactly what was coming. The figures in the room shifted, closing in, their long limbs reaching out for me. I pressed harder. The tip of the knife dug into my eye socket, sending a sharp, searing pain through my skull. My vision dimmed, blood streaming down my face, but I didn't stop. And then, just as I was about to tear the implant free, something happened. The air in the room shifted, a sudden violent force like a gust of wind blasting through the apartment. The creatures backed away, their forms distorting. I gasped, stumbling back, the knife falling from my hand. The pressure in my head intensified, a blinding pain that felt like my skull was splitting in two. And then I saw the truth laid bare in front of me. The implant wasn't fused to my eyes. It was part of me, woven into the fabric of my mind, my soul. I wasn't a victim, I was the doorway. The creatures had been using me, feeding off my fear, my terror, to make themselves stronger, to tear the barrier between our worlds apart. But it wasn't just about the implant. It was about me. My fear was the key. As long as I was afraid, they could keep coming. I fell to my knees, clutching my head. They circled around me, their whispers filling my mind, trying to force me to give in, to let the fear consume me. I could feel them pushing, digging deeper, trying to tear me apart from the inside out. But now I knew what I had to do. I had been running from them, hiding, letting the fear take over. But if I wanted to stop them, if I wanted to end this, I had to stop being afraid. I had to take back control. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking, blood still pouring from my eye. The pain was overwhelming, but I didn't let it stop me. I looked at the creatures, their black eyes watching me, waiting for me to break. But I didn't. I wasn't afraid anymore. I stood my ground, staring them down, daring them to come closer. And for the first time, they hesitated. The whispers faltered, the shadows retreating, just slightly. I could feel the air shifting again, like the balance of power was changing, like I was taking something back. The creatures didn't like that. They surged forward all at once, their forms twisting, dark tendrils reaching out for me. But this time I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I let the fear drain away, let the terror slip from my mind. And as I did, they stopped. They flashed, like a glitch in a broken hologram. Their forms wavered, distorting, unraveling. I could see the truth behind their existence. As long as I believed in them, as long as I let my fear feed them, they could cross over. But without that fear, without that power, they were nothing. I turned my back on them. I turned away from the figures, from the whispers, from the doorway they had tried to use me to open. And just like that, they were gone. The silence was absolute. No whispers, no figures, just nothing. I collapsed to the floor, my strength finally giving out. My body was broken, my mind shattered. But I had closed the door. They were gone, sealed back into whatever hell they had come from. I didn't know if I was going to survive this, but I felt at peace. I had stopped them. I had won.